Welcome the students of class 8. Welcome to our social science e-learning class. And today in this class we are going to discuss a new chapter. Okay, we are going to start a new chapter from your history book 2. So those have the old NCERT book, they can open page number 108 from your old NCERT book 2, and it is also the chapter number 9. Okay. And what is the name of our today's subunit? It is the chapter, it is the Women, Caste and Reform. The name of the chapter is Women, Caste and Reform. So what is the main objective of this chapter? That have you ever thought of how children lived about 200 years ago? Nowadays most girls from middle class families go to school and often study with boys. But long ago this type of facilities were not available. Okay. Today also people can marry anyone they like and from any caste and community, and widows can remarry too today. But 200 years ago all these things were not believable and these are not possible. So 200 years ago things were more difficult. Most children were married off at an early age. Okay, and both Hindu and Muslim men could marry more than one wife. It is called polygamy. And in some parts of the country, widows were praised if they chose death by burning themselves on the funeral pyre of their husbands. It is called sati, and the women were called sati. And sometimes in the other parts of the country, the women, it was believed that if women took education, they received the education, she would become a widow. So in this way the society was so much conservative and old fashioned and medieval. And in society the difference between men and women also there, and in society untouchability was there. Some people considered untouchables, and if they are and those people who clean the villages, worked at jobs, they are considered polluting, and so it could lead the loss of their caste status thought by the some upper caste people. Okay, so over the 19th and 20th century many of these norms and perceptions slowly changed. Many of these norms and perceptions slowly changed after the introduction of British education. So previous chapter you have learned about the British introduced the English style of learning in India as per the Wood's dispatch and considering the Macaulay's minute. Now what happened that we will discuss in the subunit, it is the working towards change. And remember, whatever I have discussed in the previous portion, this portion will not come in your examination. It is not part of your syllabus. Your syllabus is starting from that unit, working towards change. Okay. So what was the change? How was the change occurred? So from the early 19th century we find debates and discussions about social customs and practices taking on a new character. One important reason for this was the development of new forms of communication. For the first time books, newspaper, magazines, leaflets, pamphlets were printed. So with the introduction of British education system, lot of newspapers also and pamphlets, the magazines also started publishing. The books also printed, and in those books actually the translation of the foreign ideas, and sometimes directly the people they can read the books written by foreign authors in English. So these were far cheaper and far more accessible than the manuscripts that you have read about class 7. So all these books are these magazines, these are very cheaper because they are printed on the modern printing presses. Those are not handwritten. Okay. And the language of these books and pamphlets and magazines are English. So those people who have studied, those middle class, the upper class and middle class people, they started reading on those institutions established by the British. They can read those books directly in English. And therefore ordinary people could read this. Not only ordinary people means the middle class and upper middle class people, because the poor people, they were not allowed in the English schools because they are not able to pay. You have already read in previous chapter. So all kinds of issues, social, political, economic and religious, could now be debated and discussed by men and sometimes by women as well in the new cities formed by the British. The new cities, 3 new cities, that Delhi, the Madras, the Calcutta and the Bombay. The discussions could reach out to a wider public, and when the middle class and upper middle class and the upper class people, they read those books, and when they discussed in public places, then the common people, the poor people, they also understood about, they also learned slowly these ideas from in their mother tongue. When they heard those things, those things had been discussed by the upper class and upper middle class people. So the discussions could reach in the wider public and could become linked to movements for social change. And these debates were often initiated by Indian reformers and reform groups. One such reformer was Raja Ram Mohan Roy. Raja Ram Mohan Roy, one of the eminent personalities and one such reformer, and he founded an association known as the Brahmo Sabha. So Brahmo Sabha is an institution established by the Ram Mohan Roy in Calcutta, and people such as Ram Mohan Roy are described as reformers because they felt the change were necessary in society and unjust practices needed to be done away with. So they thought that the best way to ensure such changes was by persuading people to give up old practices and adopt a new way of life. And Ram Mohan Roy was keen to spread the knowledge of Western education in the country and bring about the way women were and bring about the greater freedom and equality for women. So it is very pathetic. Can you imagine when some people, they forcefully they throw women into the funeral fire, or some people, they convince a women to jump in the burning fire in the funeral fire of her husband. And when she was shouting, his voice was suppressed by some musicians playing some instruments like dhak or this type of thing. So these are very bad practices actually, and the background of these practices might be different, but later on these are turned into some cruel practices. So from the childhood experiences, Ram Mohan Roy hated this type of bad practices, and that's why he took oath to stop all this. And he wrote about the way women were forced to bear the burden and the domestic work also, and the life of widowed. And the women are confined to home and kitchen and not allowed to move out and become educated. It was also criticized by Raja Ram Mohan Roy. And finally, he was successful. That Ram Mohan Roy was particularly moved by the problems widows faced in their lives, and he began to campaign against the practices of sati. So Ram Mohan Roy was well versed in Sanskrit, Persian, and several other Indian and European languages such as Arabic, and English, and he tried to show through his writings that the practice of widow burning had no sanction in ancient texts. He also took lines from the ancient Sanskrit texts and teach people that all these things are invalid. And what happened? Many in the early 19th century, as we have read in chapter 7, many British officials, such as the Orientalists, they had also begun to criticize Indian traditions and customs. They were therefore more than willing to listen to Ram Mohan, who was reputed to be a learned man. In 1829, so with the initiative of Ram Mohan Roy, Lord William Bentinck, the Governor General, stopped the practice of sati, and it was banned. 1829, sati was banned. Okay. So the strategy adopted by the Ram Mohan Roy was used by the later reformers such as Pandit Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. Whenever they wished to challenge a practice that seemed harmful, they tried to find a verse or sentence in the ancient sacred texts that supported their point of view. They then suggested that the practice as it existed at present was against early traditions. For instance, one of the most famous reformers, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, real name Ishwar Chandra Bandyopadhyay, used the ancient text to suggest that widows could remarry. So he was a learned professor of Sanskrit, and his suggestions was adopted by British officials, and a law was passed in 1856 that describing that widow could remarry. Okay, it was passed in 1856. Widow Remarriage Act was passed. By the second half of the 19th century, the movement in favor of widow remarriage spread to other parts of the country, and in the Telugu-speaking areas of Madras Presidency, Veerasalingam Pantulu another reformer, around also formed association against widow remarriage, and around the same time young intellectuals and reformers in Bombay pledged themselves to working for the same cause, to stop the to introduce widow remarriage. And in North India, Swami Dayanand Saraswati, another eminent personality, Swami Dayanand Saraswati, another reformer, Swami Dayanand Saraswati also founded the reform association called Arya Samaj. Very important, Arya Samaj. Okay, and also supported widow remarriage in the society. So yet the number of widows who actually remarried remained low. Those who married were not easily accepted in society, and conservative groups continued to oppose the new law. But what happened? These newly wed widows were not accepted by the society, and they were okay, and the conservative groups, they continued to oppose the new law. So this is the situation at the time when they introduced the widow remarriage. Okay, so the next subunit we are going to discuss by Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar in detail, and how did he introduced girls education and made the girls education popular in Bengal in the next subunit. So students, I hope you have understood and learned about some institutions established by some reformers in first half of modern history of India. Okay. So thank you for watching. See you in the next class with the another subunit. Bye.